Hi friends, we're going to talk today about sonata form. So this is very exciting in that it is a complex form that is used in a lot of different kinds of pieces, and this is meant to be a brief introduction to you so that you can navigate form in pieces that use this form design. So I've got some slides here prepared to show you the primary features of sonata form principles that we can expect. So here are some things you want to know. First of all, as I mentioned, it's a complex, sophisticated form. It was an outgrowth of rounded binary that emerged in the early classical era. What's interesting about the form is that it uses both harmonic, tonal, and thematic, melodic contrast to build drama in the piece. It's also used as a form design for the first movement of sonatas, multi-movement sonatas written in the classical and romantic eras, as well as the first movement of symphonies, multi-movement symphonies that were written in the classical and romantic eras. It's also used for concertos, movements within concertos for solo instruments and orchestra, but with some modifications. And finally, this formal design that we're talking about today will sometimes be used for middle movements or even ending movements of sonatas and symphonies in the classical and romantic era. So let's talk about what this thing is, and let's start with what we already know. So do y'all remember rounded binary? Looks something like this, where you have a section of music we call A. When it's a two reprise form, it's repeated, and then we get another larger section that presents contrasting material that we call B, and then a return of that opening material to create two large asymmetrical sections that are repeated. Well, sonata form uses that same basic idea, except now we're calling it the A section exposition, and when it comes back later, we call it the recapitulation, and that contrasting section in the middle we call a development. Let's start by looking at the exposition. It's a little different from rounded binary form in that it has some very specific components that we would expect to find in a sonata form exposition, starting with two contrasting themes. One is called the primary theme, and we denote that with a capital P, and the other is called the secondary theme, which we denote with a capital S in our analyses. What's interesting about these two themes is that they are in two different keys. So we have harmonic or tonal contrast. The primary theme group starts in the tonic key, but then the secondary theme group is presented in a contrasting key. Common key schemes include modulating to the key of the dominant when we're in a major key, and modulating to the key of the relative major in a minor key. But other harmonic key schemes are possible. Not only do the primary and secondary theme groups have contrast in terms of their harmonic key area, but they also have thematic or melodic contrast, usually of two strikingly different melodic characters. I'm also calling these theme groups because sometimes you can have multiple themes within a primary theme group or multiple themes within a secondary theme group. The thing keeping them together is that they'll have similar character in terms of melodic style, but also the harmonic area will cohere for each of those theme groups. Anything in the primary theme group being in tonic, and then anything in the secondary theme group being in a contrasting key, such as the dominant or relative major. What is interesting also about sonata form, in contrast to rounded binary, is that when these themes come back in the recapitulation, we get the primary theme in tonic as we would expect it when it returns, but the secondary theme, when it comes back, it still has its melodic contrast, but it's now transposed to the tonic key for harmonic resolution. So the entirety of a recapitulation in a typical sonata form design would be that the entire recapitulation is in tonic, and we no longer have that harmonic contrast or that drama created by the modulation. Other features to keep in mind about sonata form is that sometimes the primary and secondary themes are bridged with a short transitional theme that just kind of connects the two together. And it's also possible to have a closing theme, which we denote in our form diagrams with a capital K. When these come back in the recap, a lot of times the transitional theme is abridged or changed because we don't need to transition really, at least not for any harmonic reason. And typically the closing theme will be restated when we have one, except, you guessed it, it's not going to be in the key it was in the exposition, but rather it will be transposed to tonic for tonal resolution. We should also think a bit about the development section, which I haven't mentioned much about so far. So the development section is quite interesting in that, unlike rounded binary form, it doesn't feature any new material. Its whole purpose is to be less stable harmonically and to feature no new material. And instead, we will see sequences and developmental techniques of the thematic material that was presented in the exposition. Techniques can include fragmentation, combining the primary and secondary theme material, manipulating the themes in various ways. Be on the lookout and the listen for different tonal areas. It's quite common for development sections in its unstable harmonic fashion to modulate to a lot of different keys and feature different tonal cells. In short, this is where composers get to show off their composition chops and their development chops. So those are the basic features of sonata form. A couple of things to keep in mind. These are just principles that are used in a lot of pieces. It's actually really hard to find a single sonata form movement that is like a cookie cutter textbook definition of whatever sonata form is, but rather we see this idea of thematic and harmonic contrast presented in an exposition section, and those ideas coming back in a recapitulation all normalized to the tonic key with developmental procedures used prior to that recapitulation. Your next steps here will be to read the handout, the guide I've posted on Moodle, and then I will be making another video to show you, walk you through an analysis of a Clementi sonatina.